The grease was already popping when she reached for the flour. No recipe card, no measuring cup, just hands that knew exactly how much was enough. She cooked like that every day, and you never thought to write any of it down. Here are 30 cheap dishes grandmothers made that nobody could replicate. Fried cornmeal mush came from almost nothing. Just cornmeal, water, and a pinch of salt, stirred over heat until it thickened into something dense enough to hold its shape. Your grandmother poured it into a loaf pan greased with lard and let it set overnight. Come morning, she sliced it thick and dropped each piece into a cast iron skillet where the butter was already foaming. The edges turned golden, then crisp, then almost caramelized while the center stayed soft and warm. Italian families in the Northeast called it polenta, though they would never admit it was the same dish. In Appalachian kitchens, it was just mush. Cheap, filling, and made from a bag of cornmeal that cost next to nothing. You ate it with maple syrup or sorghum, and kids fought over the crispiest slices. Today, restaurants charge $12 a plate and call it rustic. She served it for pennies and never called it anything. The smell of bacon fat hitting flour was how you knew tomato gravy was coming. In Appalachian kitchens from North Carolina to eastern Kentucky, this stretched a jar of home-canned tomatoes into breakfast for the whole family. She started with drippings left in the skillet from the morning's fat back, stirred in flour until it turned golden, then poured in those tomatoes, seeds, juice, and all. A pinch of sugar cut the acid. Southern living traced its roots to kitchens where milk was scarce, but garden tomatoes grew faster than anyone could eat them. You poured it thick over split biscuits and mopped the plate clean with the last torn piece. The women who made it never measured a thing. They poured until the color looked right and stirred until the texture said done. You could follow every step exactly. Same skillet, same tomatoes, same flour, and it would still taste like something was missing. The recipe survived. The woman who never needed one did not. If you told someone you could make a pie from water, they would laugh. But during the Depression, women across the country did exactly that. Poured water into an unbaked shell, scattered flour, sugar, vanilla, and dots of butter across the surface, and slid it into the oven without stirring. The earliest printed version appeared in newspapers as far back as 1886, and by the 1930s, it had earned the name Hard Times Pie. A community cookbook from Gordon, Nebraska, preserved one recipe with the year 1929 written beside it. The filling baked into something that tasted like warm vanilla custard with a golden, crackled top, closer to a sugar cookie than anything you would expect from water. It cost almost nothing, and it fed a family who still wanted something sweet after Sunday supper. Nothing left the kitchen as waste in those days, least of all bread. When a loaf went stale, your grandmother tore it into chunks, dropped it into a deep dish, and poured a custard of eggs, milk, sugar, and vanilla over the top. She let it soak until the bread swelled soft, then baked it until the edges turned brown and the center set like pudding. Some added raisins soaked in warm water. Others folded in whatever fruit was going soft on the counter, bruised apples, the last overripe bananas. In New Orleans, bread pudding became a signature dish served with whiskey sauce in fine restaurants, but its roots sat squarely in poverty, in the refusal to throw away a single crust. The version your grandmother made had no whiskey and no fancy name. It was just what you did with old bread on a Tuesday. Every family swore their recipe was the only right one, and the arguments over whether raisins belonged could stretch across a whole holiday dinner. If bread pudding was about saving what went stale, potato pancakes were about rescuing what was already left over. Mashed potatoes from last night got mixed with a beaten egg, a fistful of flour, and a grated onion that made your eyes sting. She shaped them into flat rounds with wet hands and dropped them into a skillet where bacon grease was shimmering. The trick was patience. You pressed them thin enough to crisp, but thick enough to stay creamy inside, and you never flipped until the edges went dark gold. Eastern European immigrants, German, Polish, Jewish families across the Midwest, brought the tradition from the old country, where they went by Kartoffelpuffer and latkes. In American kitchens, they had no special name. They were just what you made when you had cold potatoes and mouths to feed. Applesauce on the side if the pantry allowed it. Sour cream if somebody was feeling generous. When someone in the house was sick, your grandmother made milk toast. She warmed milk in a small saucepan, never boiling, just steaming, toasted a thick slice of homemade bread until it was golden on both sides and set it in a shallow bowl. The warm milk went over the top with a small spoonful of sugar or a shake of cinnamon. That was the whole recipe. It sounds like almost nothing, but to a child with a fever, it was the softest, safest thing in the world. The bread had to be homemade. Store-bought slices turned to paste the second they touched the liquid, and they did not have the structure to hold. She knew this without being told, the same way she knew to warm the bowl first so the milk stayed hot longer. Milk toast vanished quietly when the generation that reached for it instinctively grew old and stopped cooking. The comfort it carried lives nowhere but memory now. When lemons were too expensive or simply unavailable, women in Amish and Shaker communities across Indiana and Ohio reached for apple cider vinegar instead. They mixed it with sugar, eggs, butter, and a touch of flour, poured it into an unbaked crust, and let the oven do the rest. The result tasted remarkably like lemon custard, tangy, sweet, with a thin caramelized skin on top that cracked under a fork. The tradition traces back to the days of covered wagons, when women carried vinegar on long journeys because it would not spoil the way fresh fruit did. By the 1930s, Desperation pies had become their own quiet category of American baking. Sugar cream, chess, buttermilk, vinegar, water. Each one a way of making something satisfying from whatever sat in the pantry. The genius was always in the proportions, and those proportions lived in the hands of the baker, not on any card. When she was gone, the filling came out too sweet or too thin, and everyone knew why. In kitchens across Appalachia, poor man's gravy was breakfast, lunch, and sometimes dinner. It started with whatever fat was left in the skillet after frying bacon or salt pork, 2, maybe 3 tablespoons of rendered drippings. She added a handful of flour and stirred it into a roux, watching the color shift from white to pale gold. Then came water, not milk, because milk cost money. She stirred until it thickened, seasoned with salt and black pepper, and ladled it over biscuits split open on a plate. Some families called it sawmill gravy, others called it creek gravy. The difference between a good one and a disaster came down to the roux. Walk away for 30 seconds and the flour scorched. Pull it too early and it tasted raw. You had to stand there, wooden spoon moving in slow circles until the smell shifted from starchy to something warm and toasted. Nobody explained this. You learned by standing next to her. Every spring, before the first garden vegetables came in, your grandmother walked the yard with a paring knife and a paper sack, cutting dandelion greens close to the ground. You picked them before they flowered. That was the rule. Because once the yellow blooms opened, the leaves turned bitter enough to make you wince. She washed them 3 times in cold water, then wilted them in a skillet with bacon drippings and a splash of vinegar. Some ate them raw with hard-boiled eggs and hot bacon dressing poured over the top. During the Depression, foraging dandelions was not a lifestyle. It was how you ate when the grocery money ran out. The plant grew everywhere and cost nothing. Today, restaurants serve dandelion salad for $15. She picked hers free from the same yard where the kids played. During the Depression and again through the rationing years of World War II, eggs, butter, and milk were either too expensive or gone from shelves entirely. Wacky cake was the answer, a chocolate cake mixed directly in the pan using flour, sugar, cocoa, baking soda, vegetable oil, vinegar, vanilla, and water. You made 3 wells in the dry ingredients, poured the wet into each one, added water over everything, and stirred with a fork. No mixer, no extra bowl. The vinegar reacted with the baking soda in the oven, giving the cake a rise that rivaled anything made with eggs. The texture came out moist and dark, almost fudgy in the center. Laura Shanone documented versions of this recipe in her book on the history of American women and cooking. Kids never asked what was missing from it. They just knew it was chocolate, and chocolate meant someone in the house cared enough to bake. But if wacky cake proved you could fake the ingredients, city chicken proved you could fake the entire animal. In the Polish and Slovak neighborhoods of Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and Detroit during the 1930s, chicken was a luxury working families could not touch. Pork and veal scraps were cheap in the meatpacking cities of the Rust Belt, so the women cubed the pork, threaded it tight onto wooden skewers to resemble drumsticks, dredged them through flour and beaten egg and breadcrumbs, and fried them golden before finishing low and slow in the oven. A 1961 article in the Binghamton Press featured a housewife named Mrs. Gino DeVita sharing her family version. A manufacturer even sold a mold-stamped chicken sans volaille without poultry for shaping the ground meat into drumstick form. Butcher shops in Pittsburgh still sell pre-skewered city chicken in the meat case. If you did not grow up in the Great Lakes corridor, you have never heard of this dish. If you did, you already tasted just reading this. In 2009, Indiana made sugar cream pie the official state pie, honoring a recipe that came from the Amish and Shaker communities scattered across the state's rural stretches. It needed no eggs, just sugar, heavy cream, flour, vanilla, and a dusting of nutmeg across the top. You dotted butter along the bottom of the crust, poured the cream mixture in, and baked until the filling set thick and custard-like with a freckled golden surface. The Wicks Pie Company in Winchester, Indiana, built a business around this single recipe, shipping pies across the state from a bakery that became an institution. Families who moved away from Indiana carried the craving with them and spent years searching for anyone who made it the way they remembered. They never found it. The old women who perfected the recipe never measured the cream. They poured until the crust was nearly full and trusted the oven to finish. That instinct went with them. Cornbread crumbled into cold milk was the meal nobody talked about because everybody already knew it. You took a wedge of leftover cornbread, the drier the better, broke it into rough pieces at the bottom of a tall glass or a cereal bowl, and poured cold milk straight from the icebox over the top. You ate it with a spoon, and the cornmeal turned the milk slightly gritty and sweet, almost like a cereal that had never been invented on purpose. Across the South and through the Ozarks, this was supper when there was nothing else, and breakfast when nobody felt like cooking. Some families heated the milk and called it mush. Others sprinkled sugar on top and called it dessert. The one thing nobody did was measure. You knew how much cornbread to crumble by how hungry you were, and you knew how much milk to pour by how much was left in the jug. That glass of cornbread and milk was the last thing a lot of grandmothers ate before bed. It went quiet when they did. Scrapple was the Pennsylvania Dutch answer to a question nobody outside the Mid-Atlantic has ever thought to ask. What do you do with everything left over after the butchering is done? The answer was simple. You boiled the head, the liver, the scraps, and whatever trimmings remained, picked the meat from the bones, mixed it all with cornmeal and buckwheat flour, seasoned it with sage and black pepper, and poured the thick mixture into loaf pans to set overnight. In the morning, you sliced it thin and fried each piece in a hot skillet until the outside turned dark and crackling crisp, while the inside stayed soft. The name itself comes from scrap, which tells you everything about where this dish started. Mennonite and Amish families in Lancaster County still make it today, though the commercial versions in grocery stores taste nothing like what came out of a farmhouse kitchen in November. If you grew up east of the Susquehanna River, scrapple is sacred. If you did not, the very idea of it makes you nervous. You would think an apple pie without apples would be a disaster, but mock apple pie fooled people for over a century. The recipe appeared on the back of the Ritz cracker box starting in the 1930s, and the trick was absurdly simple. You crushed the crackers, soaked them in a syrup of sugar, cream of tartar, and lemon juice, spooned the mixture into a crust, and baked it golden. The cream of tartar mimicked the tartness of Granny Smith apples so closely that most people could not tell the difference until someone confessed. During the Depression, when fresh fruit was seasonal and expensive, this was how you put pie on the table in January without spending what you did not have. The recipe worked because it understood something most cooks already knew. Pie is really about butter, sugar, cinnamon, and crust. The fruit is almost secondary. Your grandmother proved that with a sleeve of crackers and a straight face. There was a politics to fried bologna that most people never talk about. You had to score the edges first. 2 or 3 shallow cuts around the rim, or the whole slice would cup up in the center and refuse to lay flat, frying unevenly while the edges burned and the middle stayed cold. Your grandmother knew this. She also knew to use a cast iron skillet to keep the heat at medium so the fat rendered slowly, and to press the slice down with a spatula until the edges turned dark and crispy and the kitchen smelled like every school lunchroom you ever sat in. Thick cut was the only kind worth buying. Thin slices disappeared into the bread and left you with nothing but mustard and disappointment. By the 1970s, fried bologna on white bread with yellow mustard was so common in working-class kitchens that nobody bothered to call it a recipe. It was just Tuesday. Now people act surprised when you tell them you ate it growing up, like you just admitted to something. If you did not grow up in Arkansas or the hill country of the Ozarks, the idea of chocolate gravy poured over biscuits sounds like something a child invented. But it was real, and it was breakfast. You started with cocoa powder, sugar, flour, and a pinch of salt whisked together in a saucepan. Then slowly added milk while stirring without stopping. The mixture thickened into a glossy, dark sauce that poured like gravy. You split hot biscuits on a plate and ladled it over the top, and the steam carried the smell of chocolate through every room before anyone sat down. A tin of cocoa lasted weeks, so the whole recipe cost nearly nothing and turned a plain morning into something that felt like a holiday. The old women who made it could adjust the cocoa by color and the thickness by feel alone. Their kids tried to make it after they were gone. It never poured the same. Hot water cornbread had no recipe because it barely had ingredients. Just cornmeal, boiling water, a pinch of salt, and enough bacon grease in the skillet to make the oil pop when you dropped the batter in. The boiling water was the whole secret. It cooked the cornmeal just enough to bind it together so you could shape it with your bare hands into flat oval patties, and the heat from the water meant the dough held its form when it hit the grease. In African American kitchens across the Deep South, this was a staple that stretched back generations, made the same way by women who learned the technique not from a book, but from watching their mother's hands. The sound of cornbread hitting hot oil, that sharp, crackling hiss, was the signal that supper was almost ready. You fried them until the edges turned deep gold and the crust got so crispy it shattered when you bit through to the soft, dense center. Nobody wrote it down because there was nothing to write. Bean cakes came from the bottom of the pot, from the last cup of pinto beans that were too few to serve as a meal and too many to throw away. Your grandmother mashed them with a fork, added minced onion, salt, pepper, and just enough flour to hold the mixture together, then shaped the paste into flat patties and fried them in bacon drippings until both sides turned crisp and brown. You ate them with a squeeze of ketchup or a slice of raw onion on the side, and the taste was smoky from the drippings, earthy from the beans, and somehow more satisfying than the original pot they came from. This was cooking at its most honest, taking what was nearly gone and giving it one more life. Every Appalachian kitchen and every Southern farmhouse had some version of this, though nobody agreed on the name. Some called them bean patties, others called them poor man's cakes. She just called them supper. And the night she stopped making them was the night something in the kitchen went quiet for good. If you ask 10 Southern grandmothers where chess pie got its name, you will get 11 different answers. Some say it came from the pie chest where it was stored. Others insist it was just pie, as in someone asked what kind, and the cook shrugged. Whatever the truth, chess pie traces back to at least the 1820s, when Mary Randolph published a recipe for transparent pudding in the Virginia Housewife that was, for all purposes, the same dish. The filling is simple: butter, sugar, eggs, a splash of vinegar, and a spoonful of cornmeal to set the custard and give it that slightly grainy top that cracks in the oven. Every family adjusted the ratio. You did not measure the vinegar. You poured until it smelled right. You did not time the bake, you watched the color. When the last grandmother who made it by feel alone is gone, the pie changes forever, even if the recipe card survives. Poke salad was free food that could kill you if you did not know what you were doing. Pokeweed grew wild along fence rows and ditches across the South, And every spring, families harvested the young leaves before the stalks turned red and the berries formed. After that, the whole plant turned toxic enough to send you to the hospital. The preparation was not optional. You boiled the greens, drained the water, boiled them again, drained again, and boiled a third time before they were safe to eat. Only then did you sauté them in bacon drippings with onion, and sometimes a scrambled egg stirred through. The knowledge of when to pick and how many times to boil was passed entirely by watching. Kids learned by standing in the field next to their grandmothers, and if you had to ask which leaves were safe, you were not ready to pick. That chain of knowledge has nearly broken. The fields still grow poke, but almost nobody remembers how to make it safely. There was a war inside Southern kitchens over cornbread, and it came down to one question: sugar or no sugar? In the Deep South, the answer was no, absolutely not. And if you put sugar in your cornbread, you were making cake and calling it something else. Real buttermilk cornbread used white cornmeal, buttermilk, an egg, baking soda, and salt. The cast iron skillet went into the oven first with a tablespoon of bacon drippings, and when the grease was smoking hot, you poured the batter in and listened for the sizzle that meant the bottom crust was already forming. That crust, golden, crisp, tasting of rendered pork fat and toasted cornmeal, was the whole point. Grandmothers handed those skillets down like jewelry, some 4 generations old and blacker than coal, and the cornbread that came out of them tasted different from anything baked in a new pan. Navy bean soup simmered around a single ham bone that had already given everything it had to give. After the ham was carved for Sunday dinner, and the slices were gone and the leftovers were used up, the bone went into the biggest pot in the kitchen with a pound of dried navy beans, an onion, a few stalks of celery, and enough water to cover everything by 2 inches. It cooked low and slow for hours, the beans breaking down until the broth turned thick and cloudy, and the last traces of meat fell off the bone in soft, salty threads. In some neighborhoods, a good ham bone got passed from house to house. Your grandmother used it Monday, brought it to the neighbor on Wednesday, and it might make one more pot before the flavor finally gave out. That bone fed 3 families from a single Sunday roast, and nobody thought twice about sharing it. You cannot buy that soup in any store. The flavor came from time and from hands that knew how long was long enough. Leftover oatmeal got a second life in kitchens where nothing sat idle for long. After breakfast, whatever remained in the pot was scraped into a loaf pan or a bread tin, pressed flat, and left to cool until it set firm enough to slice. Come the next morning, your grandmother cut it into thick slabs and fried each one in butter until the outside turned golden and slightly crisp, while the inside stayed warm and dense, almost like a thick pancake with the chew of porridge still in it. Some dusted the slices with cinnamon sugar before they hit the skillet. Others drizzled them with maple syrup or sorghum after plating. Kids carried cold slices wrapped in waxed paper to school as a lunch that cost nothing and kept you full through the afternoon. By the 1960s, instant oatmeal and boxed cereals had replaced the slow-cooked pot, and the leftover loaf pan stopped appearing on the counter. The dish slipped away without anyone noticing. But if those dishes fed a family, apple butter fed a whole community. In the Appalachian Hills and across Pennsylvania Dutch country, making apple butter was an all-day event that started before sunrise. Families brought bushels of apples, wine saps, rambos, whatever grew in the orchard, to a copper kettle set over an open fire in someone's yard. The apples were peeled, quartered, and cooked down with cider, sugar, cinnamon, and cloves, and the mixture had to be stirred constantly with long wooden paddles to keep it from scorching on the bottom. Everyone took turns. Kids ran between the fire and the tables where women were peeling. Men kept the flames fed. The stirring went on for 8, sometimes 10 hours, until the butter turned dark and thick enough to coat the back of a spoon. You jarred it hot and sealed it with wax, and a single batch could last a family through the winter. Those kettles were handed down like heirlooms, some so old the copper had gone green at the handles. When the last woman who organized the gathering died, the kettle went quiet, and the orchard grew over. She never used a measuring cup for biscuits, not once. She scooped flour from the bin with her hands, soft winter wheat if she had it, all-purpose if she did not, made a well in the center, dropped in a cold lump of lard, and worked it through the flour with her fingertips until the texture looked like coarse meal. Then came the buttermilk, poured slow until the dough felt right, and right was something only her hands could judge. She turned it out on a floured board, patted it flat, never rolled because rolling made them tough, and cut rounds with a tin can that had been open since before you were born. The biscuits went into a hot oven on a dark sheet pan and came out tall, flaky, and golden with a softness in the center that no store-bought mix has ever matched. Lard was the secret, and lard fell out of fashion by the 1970s when vegetable shortening took over and doctors told everyone animal fat would kill them. The biscuits changed after that. Everyone noticed. Nobody could explain why. Sorghum molasses poured slow. That was the rule. You did not rush it because the syrup was too thick and too dark to hurry, and the whole pleasure of it was watching that amber-black ribbon settle into the cracks of a hot split biscuit. Sorghum was pressed on the farm itself, from cane stalks that grew tall in the fields of Appalachia and the Upper South. Families hauled the cane to a local mill where a mule walked in circles, turning a press that crushed the juice from the stalks, and the juice was boiled in long, flat pans over a wood fire until it thickened into syrup. By the 1970s, most of those small mills had closed, and the taste of real sorghum, earthy, almost grassy, with a bitterness at the back that refined sugar never had, started disappearing from breakfast tables. You can still find it in specialty shops, sealed in jars with handwritten labels, but it does not taste the same without the biscuit, and the biscuit does not taste the same without her. Butter rolls were not a recipe, they were a reward. On baking day, when your grandmother finished rolling out pie crust, there were always scraps of dough left over, too small and oddly shaped to make another pie, too good to throw away. She gathered the scraps together, rolled them flat one last time, spread soft butter across the surface, sprinkled sugar and cinnamon over everything, and rolled the whole thing into a tight log. She sliced it into rounds, laid them in a small pan, and slid it into the oven alongside whatever pie was already baking. The kids waited by the stove for those, more than for the pie itself. They came out golden and flaky, the butter and sugar melted into a sticky glaze between the layers that burned your tongue if you bit in too early. She never made them on purpose. They only existed because she was already baking something else. When baking day stopped, the butter rolls stopped with it. Nobody thought to make them on their own. Rice pudding sat on the back of the stove for hours, and that was the only way to make it right. Your grandmother combined rice, milk, sugar, a scraped vanilla bean or a capful of extract, and a grating of nutmeg in a heavy pot and set it on the lowest flame the burner could hold. Or, if the house still had a wood stove, on the cooler edge where the heat was barely enough to keep the milk from sitting still. She stirred it when she passed by, maybe every 20 minutes, and the pudding thickened so slowly you could not see it happening. The rice swelled, the milk reduced, and by late afternoon the whole pot had turned into something creamy and dense and warm that tasted nothing like the instant versions that came in boxes a decade later. You ate it from a small bowl with a dusting of cinnamon on top, and the smell alone could pull you into a kitchen that has not existed for 30 years. She made it without a timer because she did not need one. She knew it was done the same way she knew everything, by feel, by color, by the sound of the spoon dragging across the bottom of the pot. The Sunday plate was not one dish. It was every dish, every scrap, every leftover, every last spoonful from the week pulled together into one final meal before Monday started the whole cycle again. Your grandmother opened the icebox on Sunday evening and took stock of what remained. A cup of beans, a few slices of cornbread going stale, half a bowl of greens, a piece of fatback, whatever broth was left. She heated everything separately or together, arranged it on a single plate, and set it on the table without apology. There was no recipe for this because the ingredients changed every week. What stayed constant was the principle: nothing leaves this kitchen wasted. That plate carried more meaning than any holiday spread because it represented the full week's work of feeding a family on almost nothing and arriving at Sunday with an empty icebox and a clear conscience. She could stretch a single chicken across 5 meals and still find enough bones for stock. That skill died quietly, in kitchens that went cold one by one, in houses where the stove finally stopped being the center of everything. She made herself a fried egg sandwich almost every night after he died. Not because she loved them, though she did, but because it was the one meal she could make without thinking. Bread in the toaster, butter in the skillet, egg cracked one-handed the way she'd done it 10,000 times before. In the 1940s, when eggs ran 25 cents a dozen, a fried egg sandwich was the cheapest hot supper in the country. Every diner counter served one. Every mother knew how her family liked their yolks, broken flat or left soft enough to run through the bread. The whole thing took under 5 minutes and needed nothing that wasn't already in the kitchen. For seniors living alone, the fried egg sandwich survives not because it's exciting, but because it's steady. The same pan, the same quiet pop of egg hitting hot butter, night after night, in a kitchen that used to sound completely different. Hamburger hash was the skillet miracle that made every child in the house sprint to the kitchen the moment they smelled it cooking. Mothers made it by combining ground beef, diced potatoes, onions, and whatever seasonings they had on hand, stretching a small amount of meat into a meal that fed everyone without costing much. The potatoes would brown slowly, getting crisp on the edges and soft in the middle, while the onions melted down into something sweet and perfect. The beef sizzled alongside everything, creating this savory blend that filled the entire home with a smell that no hungry kid could resist. It was a one-pan treasure, the kind of meal that made the kitchen feel warm and alive. Kids loved it because every spoonful felt different. Some bites more potato, some more meat, some deliciously heavy on onion. It was the kind of dish you could pile high on a plate and still go back for seconds, even thirds if you were lucky. Mothers liked that it stretched ingredients, saved money, and kept stomachs full for hours. Many families added ketchup, some added gravy, some ate it exactly as it came out of the pan. There was no wrong way to enjoy hamburger hash. It was cozy, hearty, and the definition of comfort food long before that phrase became trendy. Kids begged for it because it tasted like home in the most uncomplicated way possible, like the kind of dinner that made the whole family sit together without any fuss. It was simple, cheap, and unforgettable, which is exactly why it became a quiet legend in so many 1960s homes. And if Braunschweiger was too rich for the pantry, there was always sugar bread, the meal that had no business being called a meal at all. A slice of white bread, a smear of butter if you had it, a heavy shake of white sugar on top. That was it. During the Depression, when sugar cost 4 cents a pound and bread was a nickel a loaf, sugar bread was what mothers gave children who said they were still hungry after supper was gone. It wasn't nutrition, it was a negotiation. Some families skipped the butter entirely, just bread and sugar, folded in half so the crystals wouldn't fall. The strange thing is that people remember it with love, not bitterness. It tasted sweet. It came from someone who was trying. And when you're 8 years old and your mother hands you something that sparkles, you don't ask what it cost her to have nothing better to offer. You just eat it and feel lucky. Cornbread and honey was one of those simple comforts that made every 1960s kid feel like they were getting away with something sweet before dinner. Mothers made cornbread from the cheapest ingredients you could find in any pantry. A little flour, a little cornmeal, a little milk, and maybe an egg if the week had been kind. The batter came together quickly, but the moment it hit the oven, the whole house transformed. That warm, buttery smell drifted through every room, telling kids exactly what was coming without a single word being spoken. When the cornbread came out, golden and steaming, it felt like a gift. Mothers sliced it into thick squares, the kind that crumbled just a little at the edges, and handed it out while it was still warm enough to melt anything that touched it. Then came the honey drizzled or poured, depending on how generous she felt that day. The honey seeped into all the little cracks, turning a humble piece of bread into something rich and sticky and perfect. Kids loved how the sweetness balanced the savory corn flavor, creating a dessert that was not technically a dessert but felt exactly like one. It was cheap, filling, and made from ingredients almost every family always had on hand. Mothers relied on it because it stretched tight grocery budgets without ever feeling like a compromise. Kids begged for it because it tasted like warmth, like comfort, like the kind of simple sweetness that sticks in your memory long after you grow up and realize how much your mother made out of so little cornbread and honey was proof that dessert did not have to be fancy to be unforgettable. The tomato sandwich needed exactly 3 things: soft white bread, mayonnaise, and a tomato so ripe the juice ran down your wrist the moment you sliced it. In the South, where summer gardens overflowed from June through September, this wasn't a side dish or a snack, it was lunch. Harriet Ross Colquitt documented it in the Savannah Cookbook in 1933, though families had been making it for generations before anyone thought to write it down. The rules were unwritten, but firm. Duke's mayonnaise if you were from the Carolinas, Hellman's if you were from anywhere else. Tomato at room temperature, never refrigerated, because cold kills the flavor. Salted heavier than you'd think. The salt draws out the juice, and the juice is the whole point. You ate it standing at the sink or out on the porch, and you didn't bother with a plate. A tomato sandwich in August cost next to nothing and tasted like the entire summer had been building toward that single bite. Crispy fish sticks with ketchup were the oven-baked heroes of weeknight dinners, especially when mothers needed something quick that still felt fun. Kids knew the sound of the frozen sticks hitting the metal tray, stiff and pale before the oven worked its magic. As they baked, the smell grew warm and inviting, and kids would check the window for that golden edge that meant the crunch would be perfect. Mothers loved them because they were cheap, easy, and guaranteed to stop complaints. When the tray came out, kids rushed to the table with their plates ready. The first bite always had that satisfying crunch, followed by soft fish inside. Dip after dip into ketchup made the meal feel playful, like a tiny restaurant experience right at home. Fish sticks tasted like relaxed evenings, simple comfort, and just enough excitement to make dinner special. Kids begged for them because they never felt boring, no matter how often they appeared. They were cheap, cheerful, and unforgettable. Cinnamon sugar toast required nothing but bread, butter, a spoonful of sugar, and a shake of cinnamon. Yet the old cooks made it like it mattered. The secret was the broiler. Anyone could sprinkle sugar on buttered toast, but only the ones who knew slid it under the flame until the sugar bubbled and cracked into a thin, caramelized shell. You had maybe 30 seconds between perfect and ruined. During the Depression, when a loaf of white bread cost a nickel and cinnamon was one of the few spices most kitchens kept, this was the cheapest treat a child could hope for. By the 1960s, it was the after-school snack in nearly every American home, the smell of burnt sugar and warm cinnamon hitting you before you even dropped your school bag. For the seniors who live alone now, that taste is a direct line back to a kitchen counter they once stood at, waiting. The person who handed them that plate is gone. The cinnamon is still in the cabinet. Peanut butter and banana sandwiches were the sweet, sticky, unbelievably satisfying snacks that kids begged for the moment they walked through the door after school. There was something almost magical about how 2 basic ingredients could turn into a treat that felt both fun and filling. Mothers loved making them because they required no cooking, no cleanup, and almost no money. Just slice a banana, spread the peanut butter thick enough that the bread stuck to your fingers, and press it all together. The moment you took a bite, the peanut butter glued everything together in that slow, chewy way that made kids talk funny until they swallowed. The bananas added just the right amount of sweetness, almost like having dessert disguised as a sandwich. Some kids liked the bread soft, others liked it lightly toasted so the peanut butter melted a little into all the corners. No matter how it was served, it always tasted like the kind of snack that made bad days better and good days even more exciting. It was also the perfect fuel for running outside to play, riding bikes, or disappearing into the backyard until dinner. Mothers loved that it kept kids full without stretching the grocery budget in any painful way. It was cheap, healthy enough for the time, and comforting in a way that never seemed to get old. These sandwiches tasted like childhood freedom, like being able to run barefoot without a care in the world. And that is exactly why kids begged for them, day after day, like it was the best invention anyone had ever come up with. Hot water cornbread came from the oldest kitchens in America, Native American and African American homes, where cornmeal, salt, and water were sometimes everything a family had to work with. You poured boiling water over cornmeal and a pinch of salt, stirred until it formed a soft dough, shaped it into small patties with wet hands, and dropped them into a skillet of hot grease. The outside crisped golden in about 3 minutes per side. The inside stayed creamy and dense, almost like warm porridge. During the Depression, when a bag of cornmeal cost a few cents and could stretch for weeks, this was the dish that stood between hunger and holding on. No egg, no milk, no flour, just corn and water and fire. Some families crumbled it into a bowl of cold milk for supper. Others ate it alongside whatever greens they could pull from the yard. The women who made it never once measured the water. They poured until the dough felt right, and that feel lived nowhere but in their hands. Hot dog boats with melted cheese were the kind of fun, silly, absolutely irresistible meal that made every child feel like dinner had suddenly become a party. Mothers made them by slicing hot dogs down the center, filling the opening with a strip of cheese and popping them under the broiler until everything bubbled and browned. The hot dogs curled just enough to cradle the cheese, creating that little boat shape that kids thought was hilarious. The smell hit fast, a mix of smoky hot dog and melting cheese that could pull a kid from any room in the house. Mothers loved them because they were cheap, easy, and guaranteed to make even the pickiest eater happy. Kids loved them because they felt playful, almost like something from a carnival. The cheese would stretch when you took a bite, and sometimes it would drip down the side in a way that made dinner feel like an adventure. Served with a little ketchup or mustard, these boats were a masterpiece of budget cooking that tasted far richer than they really were. Kids begged for them constantly because they made dinner fun, filling, and unforgettable. They were one of those meals that captured exactly what it felt like to grow up in the 1960s. Simple joys, simple ingredients, and memories that last a lifetime. Welsh rarebit turned bread and cheese into something that almost passed for a real dinner, and for decades it rescued Americans who opened the refrigerator and found close to nothing. The dish traces to Hannah Glass's The Art of Cookery in 1747, where it appeared as Welsh rabbit. The dark joke being that families too poor for actual rabbit ate melted cheese instead. By the 1940s, it was a lunch counter fixture. Cheddar melted with a splash of ale, dry mustard, a few drops of Worcestershire, poured thick over toast. Stouffer's later sold a frozen version that moved millions of units, and whole generations grew up knowing that orange sauce as the weeknight rescue. One saucepan, one burner, whatever cheese was on hand, and under 10 minutes from a cold kitchen to a full plate. For a widower who never learned more than a handful of dishes, rarebit was a meal that felt respectable, warm, filling, and decent enough to sit down for, even when only one chair was pulled from the table. Sloppy joes on toasted buns were the messy, lovable dinners that 1960s kids acted like they could not live without. The name itself promised a meal where neatness did not matter. Mothers loved that 1 pound of meat could stretch far when mixed with sauce and seasonings. The skillet popped as the beef cooked, and when the sauce hit the pan, the whole house filled with that warm, tangy smell everyone recognized. The buns were lightly toasted to keep them from falling apart. Not that it ever worked. The sandwich dripped, slipped, and made a mess, and that was the entire point. Every bite was comforting and familiar, the kind of food that made a plain evening feel like something to look forward to. Mothers liked how fast and cheap it was, and kids begged for it because it felt like dinner made just for them. Sloppy joes were childhood joy disguised as dinner. Sardines on crackers turned a tin that cost less than a quarter into a meal that could carry you through the afternoon. During the 30s and 40s, canned sardines were among the cheapest protein in the country. Shelf-stable, no cooking required, ready the moment you peeled back the lid with that little key. The joy of cooking included sardine toast recipes by 1943, treating them not as a last resort but as a proper, quick supper. You laid them across saltines or Ritz crackers, maybe with a squeeze of lemon or a dot of mustard. The old ones never rinsed them. That was how you could tell someone who actually ate sardines from someone who was only pretending. After the war, when fresh meat became affordable again, sardines quietly slid from necessity to eccentricity. But in apartments across the country, widows and widowers still open that same flat tin for supper, standing at the counter with a sleeve of crackers, eating the way they always have. Fried bologna sandwiches were the crown jewel of cheap meals that somehow tasted like pure magic to a 1960s kid. You would hear that sizzle hit the pan and instantly know something good was coming. Mothers did not need fancy cuts of meat to keep kids happy, just a thin slice of bologna and a hot skillet. The edges curled as it cooked, forming that little bowl shape every kid waited for. Some wanted it soft, others begged for it crisp, but everyone agreed it tasted perfect. Then came the soft white bread, the kind that practically melted when you bit into it. Maybe you added mustard, maybe not. But the flavor never needed help. It was salty, warm, and comforting in a way that felt bigger than the ingredients. Mothers loved it because it took almost no time, and kids loved it because it never once felt cheap. Fried bologna sandwiches were childhood on a plate, simple and perfect every single time. Milk toast was the meal your grandmother made when the world had worn her down. Warm milk poured over buttered toast, sometimes with sugar, sometimes with just salt, and the silence of an empty kitchen. The dish first appeared in American cookbooks around 1840, and by 1896, Fanny Farmer had it listed in the Boston Cooking School cookbook under Feeding the Sick. But it was never just for the sick. It was for the tired, the lonely, the ones who didn't have the energy to cook a real supper but still needed something warm before bed. MFK Fisher called it a warm, mild, soothing thing, full of innocent strength. You tore the bread by hand. You heated the milk until it barely steamed. You sat in a kitchen that used to hold a whole family and ate something that cost almost nothing and somehow still felt like enough. Potato pancakes made from leftover mashed potatoes were the definition of turning almost nothing into something incredible. Mothers loved this recipe because it let them stretch every scrap and avoid waste, but kids loved it because those little golden patties tasted like a true treat. It started with a bowl of cold mashed potatoes, stiff and slightly lumpy from the night before. Mothers would mix in a little egg, a bit of flour, some onion if they had any left, and seasonings that were often more instinctual than measured. She would shape the mixture into small patties and drop them onto a hot, buttered skillet. The sound alone was enough to pull kids away from whatever they were doing. The edges browned first, creating that crispy ring that every child looked for before taking a bite. The inside stayed soft, creamy, and warm, almost like mashed potatoes in their coziest form. The contrast between the crisp exterior and the tender interior made every bite exciting. Some kids dipped them in ketchup, others ate them plain, but everyone agreed they were one of the best things to ever come out of a leftover bowl. Mothers appreciated that it cost nothing extra, but still felt like a real meal. Kids begged for them because they tasted like comfort made fresh again, like getting something new out of something old. They were the kind of food that made you forget you were eating leftovers because they were even better the second time around. Potato pancakes were a thrifty triumph, a childhood favorite, and a reminder that sometimes the best meals are the ones born out of necessity and a little creativity. Cornbread crumbled into a glass of cold buttermilk was a supper most people under 50 have never heard of, but anyone raised in the rural South or Appalachia knows it the way you know your own name. You took a chunk of leftover cornbread, cold from this morning or the night before, broke it into a tall glass, poured buttermilk over it until it was swimming, and ate it with a long spoon while standing at the counter. During the Depression, when cornmeal cost a few cents a bag and buttermilk stayed cool in the creek without refrigeration, this was what families ate when nothing else was left. They called regular milk sweet milk to tell it apart from the tangy, thick stuff that lasted longer in the heat. The taste was sour and crumbly and sharp, and if you grew up eating it, nothing on this earth can stand in for that exact combination. Your grandmother never measured the buttermilk. She knew the right amount by the weight of the glass in her hand. Macaroni with butter and cheese powder was one of the most requested comfort meals of the entire decade. A dish that took almost no time to make but somehow lived rent-free in the memories of every child who grew up in the 1960s. It started with a simple pot of boiling water and a box that promised creamy, cheesy goodness without costing very much at all. Those little elbow noodles dropped into the water like tiny soldiers, rising and sinking while kids watched the steam swirl around the kitchen. When the noodles softened and the water got drained, that was when the magic began. A little butter, a little milk, and that iconic packet of cheese powder turned everything bright orange in a way that felt exciting, almost like you were watching color appear right out of thin air. Kids loved stirring it, even if their mothers always had to fix it afterward because kids never quite got the cheese mixed in all the way. But the taste was what mattered. It was salty, creamy, warm, and cozy, like taking a bite out of happiness itself. It stuck to the spoon in a way that promised you would not be hungry again anytime soon. Mothers served it on busy nights, lazy afternoons, weekends, and days when the weather looked gloomy and everyone needed something cheerful. It was cheap, filling, and dependable, the kind of meal that felt like a little celebration even when there was no reason to celebrate. Kids begged for it constantly, probably more than any other meal because it tasted like childhood in its simplest form. No pretension, no fuss, just pure comfort that came from a box and made the whole day feel better. Braunschweiger on crackers was the lunch that lived in every Midwestern refrigerator for 40 years and then quietly disappeared. The German liverwurst, smooth, spreadable, dark as wet clay, came wrapped in a plastic casing you peeled back like a banana. You spread it on Ritz or saltines with a butter knife, maybe added a thin slice of onion or a line of yellow mustard. And that was lunch. In the 20s and 30s, when German immigrant communities still dominated whole neighborhoods in Milwaukee, Cincinnati, and St. Louis, Braunschweiger was as common as peanut butter. It was cheap protein that kept for weeks in the icebox. Kids carried it in lunchboxes next to an apple and never thought twice. When fresh deli meats became affordable in the 60s, the spread lost its place. The taste was too strong, too particular, too tied to a generation that was already getting old. If you can still find it in the supermarket, it's usually on the bottom shelf, where the things nobody buys anymore go to wait. Baked beans on toast were the sweet and savory treat that 1960s kids loved far more than anyone would expect from something so modest. The beans came from a can, thick and glossy, smelling like brown sugar and slow cooking. Even though they had been made in a factory, mothers heated them in a pot until they bubbled softly, creating a scent that made hungry kids rush into the kitchen. While the beans warmed up, the bread went into the toaster, and that crispy foundation was what made the whole thing feel special. Once the toast popped, mothers would spoon the beans on top until the entire surface was covered, letting the sauce drip over the sides. Kids dug in immediately, often burning their tongues because they were too impatient to wait. The contrast of crunchy toast and soft beans made every bite feel exciting, and the sweetness in the sauce made it taste almost like a dessert pretending to be dinner. It was cheap, quick, and undeniably comforting. Mothers relied on it during tight weeks when money was short and time was even shorter. Kids begged for it not because it was fancy, but because it was dependable, delicious, and somehow always tasted better at night when the whole house felt quiet. It was one of those meals that did not try to impress anyone, and yet it impressed kids every single time. Stewed tomatoes on toast could be on the table before the kitchen even warmed up. You opened a can, poured the tomatoes into a saucepan with a knob of butter and a pinch of sugar to cut the acid, heated them until they bubbled, then spooned the whole thing over a piece of toast and let the bread soak it up. In Appalachian and Midwestern homes through the 1930s and 40s, this was a complete meal. Not a side, not a starter, but supper. Some added torn pieces of bread directly into the pot and stirred until everything became a thick, sweet, tangy mush that you ate with a spoon. The entire process took maybe 4 minutes from can to plate. It cost almost nothing. It filled you up enough to sleep. And for a woman eating alone in a kitchen that once fed a household, there was something honest about it. No pretense, no performance, just a hot bowl of something red and soft and familiar. hot tomato soup with grilled cheese was the rainy day classic that never failed to make kids feel warm from the inside out. The moment a storm cloud rolled in, kids would start hoping their mothers would make this exact combo because nothing else matched the feeling of dipping a buttery sandwich into a bowl of steaming soup. The soup usually came straight from a can, cheap and dependable, mixed with water or milk to make it smoother. As it heated, the rich tomato smell filled the room, promising comfort before you even took the first bite. Meanwhile, the grilled cheese sizzled in a pan, the bread crisping in butter until it turned that perfect shade of golden brown. When the cheese melted completely, stretching in strings when you pulled the sandwich apart, you knew dinner was going to be perfect. Kids could barely wait for the soup to cool down before dipping the sandwich into it, soaking up all that warmth and flavor in one bite. It was simple, cheap, and so easy that mothers could make it even on their most exhausted days. But it never felt tired or ordinary. It felt like kindness in a bowl. It tasted like being taken care of. Kids begged for this meal because it felt like a warm hug, the food equivalent of being wrapped in a blanket while the world outside stayed cold and gray. It was childhood comfort at its absolute best. Peanut butter and crackers with a drizzle of honey required no stove, no pan, no cleanup, and no skill. Just a knife, a sleeve of saltines, and 2 jars that lived in every American pantry for the better part of a century. Peanut butter became a true household staple after George Washington Carver's work popularized the peanut in the early 1900s. And when Nabisco introduced Ritz crackers in 1934, marketing them as an affordable luxury during the Depression, the combination locked into place. You spread peanut butter on a cracker, drizzled honey across the top, and stacked them on a plate. No cooking, no waiting. A full serving of protein, fat, and sugar in under 2 minutes. For seniors living alone, especially those whose hands shake too much for stovetop cooking or whose appetites have gone quiet, this remains one of the few meals that asks nothing of you except to open the jar. Hot dogs and pork and beans were the kind of meal that felt special even though everything came from a can or a simple package. Mothers liked it because it was easy, and kids loved that sweet and salty mix that felt like comfort in a bowl. She sliced the hot dogs, let them sizzle in a skillet, then poured the thick beans over the top so everything could bubble together. The smell alone made kids hover around the stove waiting for their plates. It was cheap, filling, and needed nothing but a fork or a piece of toast to feel complete. Some families added onions, others kept it plain, but every family agreed it tasted like the best kind of simplicity. It reminded kids of slow evenings, a little extra fun, and moments when something ordinary felt exciting. Hot dogs and pork and beans were joyful, easy, and exactly what childhood dinners were supposed to feel like. Potato soup with an egg dropped in was the kind of meal that doesn't show up in cookbooks because nobody thought it was worth writing down. You peeled 2 or 3 potatoes, cut them small, boiled them in salted water until soft, then cracked an egg straight into the pot and stirred until it shredded into ribbons through the broth. A little pepper, maybe a slice of cheese melted on top if there was cheese. The Most for Your Money cookbook, published in 1938, included versions of this kind of bare-bones soup, meals designed for families counting every cent. The whole thing took about 10 minutes and dirtied 1 pot. It fed 1 person completely. It was warm and thick enough to feel real. No one served this at a dinner party or brought it to a church social. This was what you made at the end of the month, alone, standing at the stove in a kitchen where the only sound was the water coming to a boil. Frito pie in its cafeteria style was the chaotic, crunchy, messy masterpiece that 1960s kids absolutely adored. It was not fancy or expensive, but it tasted like pure childhood joy. Corn chips formed the base, sometimes poured onto a plate, sometimes eaten straight from the bag. Hot chili or seasoned beef melted the chips just enough, and a shower of cheese glued the whole thing together. Kids loved the mix of textures, crispy edges, soft centers, savory meat, and gooey cheese. It felt fun and a little rebellious, like party food pretending to be dinner. Mothers loved how quick and cheap it was, perfect for busy nights. To kids, it tasted like loud cafeteria lunches, And after-school laughter, Frito pie was pure 1960s magic, unforgettable to anyone who grew up with it. Beans and rice fed more American families through more hard decades than almost any other single dish, and in New Orleans it was never a sign of poverty. It was Monday. Red beans simmered with a ham bone while the laundry boiled in the yard, and by evening the pot was thick and smoky and ready to pour over a mound of white rice. Francis Moore Lappé confirmed in Diet for a Small Planet in 1971 what poor families had always known by instinct. Rice and beans together form a complete protein, the same as meat. The ingredients cost pennies. The leftovers kept for days. One pot, one burner, enough for a week of solitary suppers reheated in a kitchen where the table only needs one placemat now. For the seniors who still make a pot on Monday the way their mothers did, the dish carries more than nutrition. It carries the sound of a house that used to be full. Those kitchens are gone now, and the hands that fed them are still. If any of this brought you back, like and subscribe.